Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I would like to talk to you about Linux. So before talking about Linux, let's take a step back and talk about something that we are already familiar with. So all of you use a laptop, right? We use phones, we use smart devices and all of that. Now, if I want, let's suppose I have my laptop and I want to play an audio file on it. What's the best way to do that? I'll open my file explorer, for example. I'll navigate to that particular directory and I'll double click on that audio file and it will open the file for me. Any application, it might be VLC that will open it. It might be an audio player that whatever the default app we have, that will open that particular file for me, right? Now, if you want to talk to your machine, you're needing an environment. We can't talk to our computer without an environment, right? So anytime we have a machine and we want to talk to it, we need an operating system because I cannot directly tell my hardware, for example, the speaker, to play an audio file for me. So that's where our operating system comes into the picture. It provides us an interface for interacting with our computer. Now, what you're seeing in front of me is the Windows operating system. And an operating system has two parts to it. One is the operating system kernel, the other one is the desktop environment. Now, let's try to understand what these are by using an example. So, as soon as I log in, this is what I am presented with, which is my desktop environment, right? And let's suppose I want to open this particular folder, let's say this PC. So if I want to open this particular folder, this PC, all I need to do is double click on it, right? And it opens the folder for me. Now, you wanted to open a folder, and so what you did was you interacted with the desktop environment and then clicked on that this PC icon, and it opened it for you and displayed it to the screen, right? So the desktop environment helped you in doing what you wanted, but at the background all the job was done by the operating system kernel, right? It went and took the permission of the screen so that it could display that particular folder for you, right? So we can see that an operating system comprises of two things: the desktop environment and then the operating system kernel. With the desktop environment, the user can interact with the operating system kernel, and the kernel in the background will manage all the hardware resources for you. So a machine is nothing but it's an integrated set of hardwares, right? Now, if I want to interact with my operating system kernel, I have got two interfaces. The first one, it's quite visible, is our desktop environment, which is a graphical user interface, right? I can see buttons, I can see icons, maybe I can, right, let's suppose I can click on this, right? So it's a more visual way or graphical way of interacting with my operating system kernel. But it's not the only one that we have, right? Though it's the most common way and more user friendly way of interacting with your operating system, but it's not the only interface we have available. So let's bring Linux into the picture. Linux is not an operating system in itself. It is just one half. So Linux is nothing but it's the kernel, which means it is managing all of the hardware. And if you take the Linux kernel and then you bundle it with a desktop environment, let's suppose it could be the Mate desktop environment, it could be the GNOME desktop environment, it could be the XFCE desktop environment. So if you take the Linux kernel and any desktop environment and combine these two, we get a operating system. Now in the Linux world, this particular operating system is called a Linux distribution, and maybe you might have heard about Ubuntu, Parrot OS, Kali Linux, and all of that. Now it's quite similar to how Windows work. We have Linux Mint, which is very similar to how Windows works. But that's not the main idea. The main idea here is that I want you to introduce you of interacting with your machine using a different interface. So we have all been comfortable using the desktop environment, but my approach here will be to teach you another interface that you can use to interact with your machine. And that environment or that interface is nothing but our command line interface, where we don't have icons and buttons, but we use textual commands or it's a text based interface where we just utilize commands to do the things that we usually do using our desktop environment. So for that, let's see what we can do, right? So I hope you might, I don't think you'll be getting what this for particular interface is, but it's just that I've opened Visual Studio Code in the cloud, which is using the GitHub code spaces, and I'm just utilizing the terminal window that comes built into this, right? So in this interface, the command line interface comprises of nothing but a shell, and in this particular environment the shell is nothing but the bash shell. And in fact, I can do most of the things that I do using my desktop environment, but it will be much more flexible and I can do it much more eloquently. For example, let's suppose I want to know the current date, right? If I have my desktop environment, I can just look at the taskbar and okay, it will tell me it's 15 March 2025 and currently it's 7:02. Now, if I want to do the exact same thing using my desktop environment, all I need to do, or sorry, not the desktop environment, if I want to do the same thing using my shell, all I need to do is issue the date command. So let me show you using this example. So here I've introduced the date command, and you can see as soon as I press enter, it displays the date as well as the time for me, the current time, right? Or maybe when you open a desk, when you log into your machine, you get to see this desktop, right? You are given all the files and folders that is available. To do the exact same thing, we just need to use the ls command, and it does the job for me. Similarly, if I want to open a particular file using a desktop environment, what do? I just double click on it. If I have to do the exact same thing using the shell, all I need to do is use the cd command, which stands for change directory. So I could simply do, let's suppose, cd, and then I have the folder called Siddhant hyphen capital C. And you can see the prompt has changed and it took me to this particular directory. Now, most of you may be asking, okay, why is this important? Why is the shell important? I'm able to do my task using a desktop environment, but that's where that's why, yeah, it is a valid reason. But the thing is, developers usually use the shell because it is much more powerful and much more flexible. Let me show you using an example. I want to create a folder over here on my desktop environment. So what do I need to do? Okay, I did a right click on any empty area. I went to this new and then clicked on this folder, and okay, I renamed it to, let's suppose, Rohit. If I have to make another folder, I would do the exact same thing, right? And it's quite manual in this sense. But if I want to do the exact same thing using a shell, it it can do this job much more quickly. For example, let's suppose I want to make 5 folders, right? And their name should be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All I can do is write mkdir, which stands for make directory, a pair of square curly brackets, and then let's suppose 1 dot dot 5. And once I hit enter and do ls, you can see 5 of these folders were created for me, and they have been individually named 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5, which would have been very hectic doing using the desktop environment. Yeah, so let's move back to Linux kernel again. So we have, if you want to know about the Linux kernel, you can visit this website called kernel.org, where the Linux kernel lives. So the The most recent version, if I look at over here, is okay, 16.13.7, which was released in this particular year, is the most stable version, right? And let me introduce you to different Linux distributions that are available. For example, let's take the example of Ubuntu. You can go to ubuntu.com, and if you click on this download Ubuntu desktop, you can download Ubuntu desktop environment or maybe the Ubuntu operating system from here. Similarly, we have Kali Linux, we have ParrotOS, and all of that. Okay, now let's talk about how can we install any Linux distribution on our machine or our laptop. There are three ways that I'll tell you which you can utilize to install any Linux distribution on your system. The first method will use your entire disk. So you won't be able to use your Windows operating system. We will directly install any Linux distribution on our physical hard disk. But then that's not the best way out there. The second method is again not that good, which is to dual boot. That means we divide our hard disk in two partitions. On one partition, the Windows operating system lives. On the other partition, the Linux distribution lives. And anytime you open your machine, the boot manager will give you a choice of whether you want to boot into the Windows operating system or you want to boot into the Linux operating system. That is also a very good way of having Linux on your system. Now, the third and the most or the best way I would say is to use what's called a virtual machine. So, what happens in a virtual machine is this. This is a physical machine that I have in front of me. Using a virtualization software, we create another machine, but this is not a physical machine. This is a virtual machine which is inside our main physical machine. And this draws power from our physical machine. So it has its own RAM, it has its own speakers, but it is accessing all of those from our physical machine. Now to do that, what we need is a virtualization software which will basically draw power from our physical machine and pass it to the virtual machine. So in that virtual machine, this virtual machine will have its own hard disk space, right? So we'll install Linux operating system in that particular virtual machine. So the best way to do this is using a virtualization software called VirtualBox, which I have already installed on my system. So if I just search for VirtualBox, okay, here we have. So you can see this is my virtualization software, which is virtual machine, and I can just click on this new button and create a virtual machine for me, as it says create virtual machine. And in this particular virtual machine, I can install any Linux distribution I want. So let's take an example of creating, let's suppose, how about creating a how about installing ParrotOS, which is a pretty good Linux operating system. So let me name it to ParrotOS. I'll select the ISO image which you can get from the official website of ParrotOS operating system. So I'll just select that particular ISO. So this type should be Linux, subtype Debian, version Debian 64. We need to give it some hardware. I'll go with 2 MB, 2 GB, and this processor should be at its. If I go to hardware, I'll just allocate 20 GB to it, and I'll pre-allocate the full size and then click on finish. So this is creating the virtual machine for me, and so we'll have to wait for a few seconds. Okay, this is taking some time. Don't worry, it happens. Okay, so this is created for me, right? You can see this ParrotOS named virtual machine has been created for me, And if I want to start this virtual machine, all I need to do now is click on this start button. Okay, this will take some time, but bear with me. Okay, here we have it. So it's giving me an option whether to try or install. I'll go with the first option. I won't be installing it. This is just a demo to show you how you can utilize VirtualBox to install any Linux distribution, because this is the best way. Okay, so this is starting up. Okay, it will take some time depending on our hardware. Fine, it's taking quite a lot of time. Okay, no matter. We'll just close it because it's taking too much of time. I don't know, maybe because I don't have enough RAM on my system. So I think you've got the whole idea of how we can install any Linux distribution on our Windows operating system. And in fact, there are ton and ton or tons and ton of Linux distribution available. If I have to give you a number, it would be around 1,000 probably. Yeah. Okay, so to conclude, then we talked about what an operating system is. It is the desktop environment plus the kernel. We talked about what a Linux kernel is, how we can bundle it with a desktop environment to get a operating system, also called Linux distribution. We talked about three different operating systems, which is Parrot OS, Kali Linux, and Ubuntu. I showed you how we can utilize shell to interact with our machine. I introduced you about the mkdir command, the ls command. We talked about the cd command, right? And then I also showed you how to create a virtual machine and install a Linux distribution on it. So that's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.